The first cracks in my marriage appeared as faint as hairline fractures in glass, visible only when the light hit just right. Clara and I had built a life of polished surfaces, a brownstone in Brooklyn, weekend escapes to the Hamptons, and a social circle that mistook curated smiles for genuine contentment. We were architects of illusion, constructing a facade of perfection to mask the rot beneath. She was a corporate litigator, her ambition a blade that carved her path through courtrooms and cocktail parties alike. I was the quieter force, a financial strategist who preferred spreadsheets to spotlights. Our roles were clear. She dazzled, I stabilized. The night it began, Clara arrived home with the scent of another man's cologne clinging to her blouse, a citrus and smoke blend that didn't belong to either of us. She claimed it was from a colleague's goodbye hug, her tone smooth as poured mercury. I nodded, filing the detail away like a suspicious transaction. Over the next month, the clues multiplied. Deleted text threads, late meetings that bled into dawn, and a sudden obsession with privacy. Her phone angled away at dinner, her laptop snapping shut when I entered the room. I became a forensic accountant of our relationship, tracing discrepancies in her stories, cross-referencing timelines, and discovering the truth in the negative space of her lies. The final proof arrived via a misdirected email, a boutique hotel confirmation for a weekend in Vermont, booked under her name and a man's I didn't recognize. The dates coincided with her supposed solo wellness retreat. That night I drove to the hotel, parked blocks away, and watched through binoculars as she laughed with him in the valet circle, a man with the groomed carelessness of a venture capitalist, all designer stubble and patronizing charm. I took photos, my hands steady, my pulse a dull thud. This wasn't grief. It was the clarity of a mathematician solving for X. Returning home, I combed through her digital footprints. She'd hidden assets, an offshore account in the Caymans, a safety deposit box key taped beneath her jewelry drawer. But the real treasure was her secret Instagram account, a gallery of her double life, yacht parties, ski trips, and a pregnancy test emoji posted the week prior. The caption read, "New chapter?" I stared at the screen until the pixels blurred. 20 years of marriage, and she'd reduced us to a footnote. I didn't confront her. Confrontation was for amateurs. Instead, I began drafting a ledger of her sins, each entry a brick in the foundation of her ruin. I noted her vulnerabilities, her obsession with reputation, her fear of professional irrelevance, her illicit pregnancy. Then I waited. Let her grow complacent. Let her believe her lies still held. The trigger came 2 weeks later. She left her unlocked iPad on the kitchen counter, a Slack notification glowing, "Board meeting moved. Need your input on the merger loophole." Her firm was brokering a high-stakes pharmaceutical deal, one riddled with ethical landmines. I memorized key details, then cross-referenced them with insider data I'd quietly harvested. The numbers didn't add up. The company she represented had buried clinical trial failures, a fact known only to a privileged few. That's when the shape of her destruction crystallized. Clara had built her career on moral flexibility, but even the most agile liar can't outrun a well-timed truth. I began compiling a dossier, financial records, timelines of her infidelity, and the damning clinical data. Each document was a scalpel, precision sharpened to excise her from the life she'd poisoned. As I worked, I considered the child she carried. A paternity test would come later, but it hardly mattered. Whether mine or his, the baby would be a weapon, a symbol of her betrayal, a wedge to fracture her carefully constructed narrative. I booked a consultation with a divorce attorney renowned for his ruthlessness, then scheduled a discreet meeting with the investigative journalist hungry for a career-making scoop. By the time Clara returned from her next business trip, smelling of alpine air and deceit, the gears were already turning. She kissed my cheek, her lips cold, and asked about my day. I smiled, handed her a glass of Malbec and said, "Quiet, just planning for the future." Revenge, I learned, was not an explosion, but a slow suffocation. I started with her career. Using a burner email, I leaked the clinical trial data to the journalist, framing it as a whistleblower act. The story broke on a Monday morning. Front-page headlines accusing Clara's firm of corporate manslaughter. Reporters swarmed her office, shareholders panicked. She called me, voice frayed, claiming sabotage. I murmured sympathy while watching her firm's stock price crater in real time. Next, I monetized her secrets, the offshore account. I transferred its contents to a shell corporation I'd established months prior, funneling the funds into a trust for the child she didn't yet no ID fight to claim. The safety deposit box held jewelry bought with marital assets, a violation of our prenup. I documented every piece, then donated them to a charity auction under her name. Let her explain her generosity to her lover when he noticed his gifts missing. Her Instagram account became my masterpiece. I hired a hacker to bypass her two-factor authentication, then posted the pregnancy test photo to her public profile, tagging her firm and the venture capitalist. The caption, "Celebrating new beginnings with my partner in crime." Within hours, her professional contacts connected the dots. The timing of the pregnancy, the merger's collapse, the affair with a man whose startup was indirectly tied to the pharmaceutical deal. Conspiracy theories bloomed like toxic algae. Clara stormed home that night, eyes wild. "Someone's trying to destroy me," she hissed. I poured her another drink, my face a mask of concern. "We'll fix it," I lied. As she rambled about legal strategies, I excused myself to the study and opened a brokerage account in her name. Using her stolen credentials, I executed a series of high-risk trades, shorting her firm's stock, betting against her lover's company. The losses would be catastrophic, untraceable, and entirely hers. The final blow came at her obstetric appointment. I'd bribed a nurse to slip a paternity test into her routine blood work. When the results arrived, I intercepted the mail. The child wasn't mine. That afternoon, I filed for divorce, citing adultery and financial malfeasance. The court documents included every shred of evidence, the photos, the emails, the trades. I requested full custody of a child I didn't want, knowing the demand would terrify her, knowing she'd fight to keep the baby, and knowing the battle would bleed her dry. She retaliated clumsily, accusing me of emotional abuse. Her lawyer cited late-night work hours, my coldness, but without proof it rang hollow. Meanwhile, I played the grieving spouse in court. Steadfast, bewildered, betrayed. The judge granted me 80% of our assets, citing her reckless dissipation of marital funds. Her lover, facing his own ruin, vanished. Clara's reputation calcified into a cautionary tale, the woman who gambled everything and lost. Clara's unraveling was a public spectacle. Stripped of her partnership, she moved into a cramped apartment, the walls echoing with the cries of a child she resented. I paid anonymous tipsters to leak her address to tabloids. Paparazzi camped outside, capturing her decline. Unwashed hair, frantic phone calls, a baby carrier dented from being dropped in haste. I, meanwhile, cultivated a new identity. The Shell Corporation morphed into a philanthropic venture, my name lauded in donor circles. I dated sparingly, enough to suggest recovery, never enough to risk entanglement. At night, I'd drive past her building, watching her shadow pace behind thin curtains. She never saw me. A year post-divorce, she attempted a comeback, writing a memoir painting herself as a victim of systemic misogyny. My hacker altered the manuscript before publication, inserting contradictions and plagiarized passages. The book was pulped. Her publisher sued. Desperate, she sold her story to a true crime podcast. I funded a counter-narrative through dummy accounts, a series of exposés dissecting her lies. Listeners turned on her, branding her a narcissist. The child, now a toddler, became her chain. I petitioned for visitation rights, not out of desire, but to force her into courtrooms, to watch her flinch at the sound of my name. Each hearing chipped at her sanity. When she finally snapped, hurling a mug at the judge, I had her committed for a psychiatric evaluation. The state deemed her unfit. I declined custody, of course. Let the system swallow the child. Let Clara rot in a state facility, replaying her mistakes as the world forgets her. Last month, I received a letter from her, scrawled, rambling, pleading for mercy. I burned it unread, the ashes swirling like the remnants of the life we'd shared. Revenge, I've learned, is not a dish served cold. It's a banquet, each course meticulously crafted, consumed over years until nothing remains but the bitter aftertaste of victory.